Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So would like to cover a little bit more in depth the subject of projection, how it can be used against you, as well as how you can become aware of you projecting onto other people and so forth to help gain clarity with yourself and what are the pitfalls. So I was watching a program the other day, and they were talking about what is called a mirror exercise. And the idea of the mirror exercise is that everything that happens to you and everything that you see in the world is a reflection of your own inner reality and yourself. And it's externalizing your inner world and sort of spreading it out there. And although this does happen, some of the stuff that we see is definitely being reflected back at us. It also can be used as a weapon to make everything that happens in your life and everything you see your own fault and your own inner dialogue. And so other people don't have any independent responsibility for what they're doing. Narcissists love this technique. It's a good way to put whatever it is that they're doing to you back on to you and to say that it's all your fault. You're the one who's seeing it. You're projecting this reality onto them and they have nothing to do with it. And of course, that's not true. So I'm thinking about how to approach the subject because it's a complex subject. So I guess we'll just dive in and see where we end up. First off, figuring out when you are projecting. That is your number one goal when it comes to shadow work, personal and relationship work, therapy, whatever it is that you're doing. Figuring out what your part is, what your responsibility is paramount. And the more clear you become of your own part in things, the better able you are to detect when someone else is doing something to you and you're not just reflecting it back to yourself. Take some basic projections that happen on in a day-to-day environment. Let's say you have an anxiety that people don't trust you, don't believe you, don't listen to you, something like that. Um, think bad things about you. And you're out in a store and you're buying something, and the person behind the counter says something that triggers this part of you, and it makes you angry, upset, and feel like you're being accused of something when you haven't done anything. That's one example. Um, and one of the things that you can do in a situation like that is to try and remember that generally speaking, whatever is going on with the other person has probably nothing to do with you whatsoever. They're going through their own stuff, whatever their own projections are, their own reality that's happening to them. They're not thinking, they're not being present, they're not aware of how their words are going to affect other people. And it's just like something that happens. And I think that that is the, you can probably look at your own interactions with strangers in that light and pick up on some of that kind of stuff happening in your own life, where you put more meaning behind the words that someone else is saying. So that's one of the things. The other one of the other things, of course, is each one of us is the center of our own universe. So everything that we experience comes from the place that it's all about us. And as a child, that's how we feel. That everything in the universe is a reflection of us, and everything that happens in the universe is trying to tell us something or is because of us. I went through a lot of that as a child, being in an abusive home environment, thinking that if I could change something about me, if I could be perfect and never make never get angry, never make someone else angry or whatever, then everything would work well. The entire universe would realign itself. and everyone around me would be happy and not fighting. And it's a clearly an incorrect assumption. So we all start off coming from that point of view when we're children. It's normal. We don't have a very well defined ego structure. It's difficult for us to recognize that there are other people in the world because everything is about us when we're young. So if you're having trouble identifying something, try to go back to when you were a kid and think about it from that perspective. It can sometimes help you to see where you're doing it. And projections come from all sorts of different places. You meet someone, there's something about their face that's familiar. You don't remember exactly why it's familiar. It gives you a very specific feeling about that person, either positive or negative. It might make you act differently around them, and you don't know why. And if you can sit with that when something like that takes place in your life, sit with it and try to identify what is it about this person, what it is about their energy, what do they remind me of, who do they remind me of, what situation that I've been in does this remind me of, and try to unravel where that comes from. If it's a past relationship or negative experience or a positive experience, it doesn't have to be negative. It can be a positive experience, and that can lead us to lowering walls that should be up when we shouldn't be lowering them because we have a feeling that we know this person when we've just met them for the first time. Generally speaking, that comes from something in our unconscious that is projecting itself onto them and making us feel this way. This is another thing that narcissists really like about people. if they can like, sort of tap into a prior relationship that was positive for you or a need that you have that they can see that you have, like a need loved or accepted or paid attention to or understood. I think that was my first husband was really good at figuring out that I wanted someone to understand me for who I was, to see me for who I was. And the pretense, of course, was that he did, which turned out not to be the case. But that was the tactic that he used. And I felt like he was the first person I met who actually got me in some way. And then, of course, the other manipulation ploys begin with trying to rearrange my personality to suit him better, use my projections against me, my fears, my anxieties, my hopes, my dreams, my desires, my wishes, whatever they might be, as a method for sculpting me into the victim he needed me to be. And there's a high likelihood that that wouldn't work on me anymore because of all the work that I've done. But it doesn't mean that I failed in some way because I was a good target for this kind of activity. It means that I hadn't grown up yet. I remember when I went to the self-defense class in the incest survivors group when I was in Santa Cruz. I became aware of the fact that there's the different aspects of our personality. There's the child self, the adult self, the intellectual self, the spiritual self, and the part of me that had not been allowed to be accepted or grown up or whatever was the child me. And so my ability to interact with people was basically on the level of about a 5 or 6 year old child's way of interacting with people, which is not healthy. Doesn't get you very far either. Yeah. Tantrums, temper tantrums. They might work when you're 5 or 6, but they don't work when you're almost 30. Um, so there is, or more than 30 when I was in Santa Cruz. I was 35 when I arrived in Santa Cruz. And, so there was a lot of stuff for me to learn about how to communicate with people. But it was always an interesting experience for me when I would encounter an obvious projection, like reading Starhawk's book, The Spiral Dance. I had created an inner image of what she looked like, which was basically like me because I identified with everything she said so much. And I didn't know that I had internalized this image projection of her until I met her in person. And then the two images didn't match. So that was a very interesting experience of how we do it without even knowing it. And we may do it and never even find out that we've done it unless circumstances arrange things so that we can become aware. I try to be aware of the fact that it's a tendency that we all have to project onto each other. And like I said at the start, the more clear we become, the more capable we are of seeing someone for who they are instead of who we think they should be or who we hope they might be or who we think they are. We can actually listen to the input that they give us and pay attention to the signals that are coming from them if we have cleared our vision from these other associations, internal, external, past associations, and are able to be in the present with that person and see them for who and what they are, whether they're dangerous or helpful, either way. And of course, we talk a lot about boundaries, and that's part of the reason for creating them. Becoming a well-defined individual, knowing who you are, what is okay with you, what is not okay with you, helps you to determine when someone crosses those lines that you have set, so you can take action to protect yourself and get away from a person who is crossing those lines. How it's weaponized, though, is kind of interesting because there is that desire in a lot of people who are in researching and interested in paganism, witchcraft, magic, spirituality in general, finding purpose, knowing why they're here, um, wanting to be recognized for doing good work, a desire to improve themselves, become more spiritually awakened. And there are some unscrupulous people out there who see that as an opportunity to manipulate and, in some cases, utterly destroy somebody's personality by weaponizing the idea that we project everything outward. If you think about it, the notion that the entire universe is a reflection of your inner reality on its face is absurd. The cat that lives in your house does not care what you think about their reality. I mean, really, one of the reasons why a lot of people don't like cats, they don't comply. But even beyond that, the rest of life just on the planet, the bear wandering through the woods, the deer that comes into your front yard, like we ascribe meaning to encounters with them that may not actually have any basis, but we like how it makes us feel when we ascribe meaning to certain kinds of encounters. And I do that too. Like if I'm in a dangerous situation and I see a deer, I feel better. I feel I'm going to get through this. I'm not going to die. This has become one of the messages that I receive from the universe. But if you let it go too far in that, that means that every word everyone says is meant for you. Every reaction that they have or facial expression they have is meaningful to you. And that leads to a form of disassociation from reality where it's hard to describe, but it's not healthy. It's not a good idea. I believe that the universe is trying to communicate with us all the time, but I don't think it uses other people to do it in particular. Um, because each one of us has got that same urge in us, that same um, tendency towards projecting our inner reality in the outward world. I've had a few encounters of people projecting onto me, and I knew that they were projecting because I know myself well enough to be able to tell. One I've mentioned more than one occasion, one massage therapist that would work on me, and I would come into the session feeling powerful and together and healthy emotionally, things going my way in my own head kind of thing. And she would start working on me, and then she would start to tell me about the dark pain she could see in my heart way down deep. And I got pretty annoyed by the entire process because she was, I don't think she thought that she was manipulating me, but it was clear that she was projecting her own pain from her own past onto me and seeing it come back and wanting me to acknowledge it. And somehow this would make her feel better about herself. I don't know. But I wasn't willing to accept her projection. It's like I'm I'm ornery that way. I'm sure there's a lot of people that wish I would be more compliant, but I'm just not. If I see BS, I call BS. That's kind of the way it is. And it doesn't mean I'm perfect, obviously, which I state repeatedly. And everyone has to sort of figure out what their own little things might be. I had gotten so annoyed with her at this point that I was getting ready to bring a mirror in to my massage session and hide it under my pillow. And when she did it to me again, bring it out and hold it in front of my face and go like, "Hey, that's not me you're seeing yourself." So I know that this happens, and I'm sure I have definitely had my own issues with it. I found that positive projection is harder for me to identify than negative projection. And I was quite taken aback with one of our former members of the group that I had projected all kinds of positive potential on too. I saw her as I was grooming her to take over my position in the group and so forth, and sort of took her into my heart as a daughter. And then she said no, not in a very good way, for sure, but she definitely said no. And then I was left with a broken heart and a lot of confusion, and I had a hard time understanding it. I had to sit with it for quite some time and sort of take it apart and look at it and see exactly what is it about this situation that has affected me so greatly. And then I looked at some of the things that she had asked me and said in the past and realized I had glossed over them because it didn't fit my own mental scenario that I had created that I expected was correct. So the positive projections, the expectation that the person you're working with is more evolved and more together than they are in reality, um, assumption that that's the case is just as dangerous as projecting negativity onto someone who isn't actually harboring negative feelings towards you. It's complicated. All these things are complicated. There's no one straight, line from here to there that says this is what's going on. But when things happen, being aware of the fact that that is essentially one of the components helps you to sift through and identify it. So, like when I went into a local Radio Shack when we still had them, and I went to pay for my husband's part at the counter, and I looked at this visually speaking, nice, young, clean shaven man and kept seeing sexual assaults in my head over and over and over again, which made me feel very uncomfortable. I did what I could in the moment, didn't give him my home address because that seemed like a bad idea from the vibe I was getting. And then went home and told my husband and told a bunch of different people, just, to get sort of some feedback. And I thought about it and it's like, I'm in a healthy relationship with a man. I've had some horrific relationships with men in the past, obviously, with my first husband being a serial rapist and a sociopath. My second husband beating my children and being verbally abusive and in my view, and other kinds of things like that. So it's not like I didn't have potential fodder for jumping to conclusions, but then I looked at it and I'm like, there's 100 men on the street that I've passed by, encountered in stores or whatever, that I've never had that feeling about, ever. And when I went back in the store with my husband, I discovered I was hiding behind him. I put him between me and the other man's eye line so that he couldn't look at me directly. So clearly, I was very disturbed by this person's presence. And then later found out when I talked to one of my clients who was involved in the police and DA's office kind of thing, um, and told her about meeting this guy and how weird it was. And she asked me when. And I told her when. She told me that they had had a serial rapist here in town during that time that was never caught. And I'm like, yeah, I know why. Because he left for another Radio Shack. So sometimes it's important to follow your instincts and then think about the the potential later. I mean, if I thought about it later and thought about what he looked like and identified a person in my past who had abused me or assaulted me or molested me or something like that, I might have had a different outcome. But he didn't look like anybody I'd ever met, as far as I could tell. And then several other women had a similar experience with this individual. So he was creeping us out. He was putting out a creep you out vibe. And that's the thing. It's like, yes, it's important to know that you're projecting, but it's also important to pay attention to your instincts and let the fallout happen later if you need to work through it or something like that and figure it out. In the moment, your safety is more important, and you don't owe anyone out there your trust or, yeah, you don't owe anybody your trust. Trust is something that is earned through experience. You earn that, someone earns that by showing up when they say they're going to, doing what they say they're going to do, that kind of thing. And by their actions, then you have some kind of a baseline of whether or not you can trust that person. At least that's a start. But a total stranger you just meet somewhere on the street, you don't owe them anything. Person on the internet who says something negative to you, you don't owe them anything. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't need to defend yourself to a stranger. It's none of their business. It's entirely your choice to decide if you want to try and explain yourself or not, but you don't owe them anything. You owe it to yourself to be honest with you, with who you are, and to your relationship with the universe, to your relationship to magic. Your word and your ability to be trusted by the universe is the foundation of your power when it comes down to it. That's really a lot of what it's about. The universe needs to know who you are and what it can and cannot count on. And the spirit world will respond to you based on that kind of stuff. So if projection is so common in just regular everyday life, like, the person who's driving like an erratic idiot on the highway, to the cashier behind the cash register who says something out of the blue that you can't understand, that you feel is aimed at you. Think about how that's going to affect the magical realms. You have if you can project onto a living being who's actually there in some way, be able to show who they actually are and defend themselves, what's going to happen when you encounter spirit. And that's where I think a lot of confusion comes in with what spirit beings are, because our projections onto them are things that they can just literally reflect directly back to us, because they're not physical. They can change shape. They can become your fears and your anxieties, your hopes and your dreams. And so to see them clearly is one of the challenges of all of this work. When you're dealing with spirit or the mental plane and thought forms and so forth, the things that you believe, the narratives you tell yourself, which we've talked about, are the shapes and forms and feelings that whatever it is that's out there will take on. So if you're in, say, a basic haunting, start to feel a little bit anxious. It feels like somebody's watching you. You see something out of the corner of your eye, it makes you worried. You start to think that something bad is going on. Then worse things begin to happen and you start to become afraid. And then more worse things continue to happen, which confirms your suspicions. Because you have set the tone and you have created an environment where whatever this energy was to start with is now adapting to your narrative, your expectations, your anxieties, your fears. And so to be able to maintain that kind of clear vision, unfiltered and unbiased, neutral perception of what's going on is a goal that we all work towards if we want to get farther into whatever is really going on. Because non-physical reality is easy to manipulate, and then it plays with our thoughts and ideas and our assumptions and our narratives and our fears and anxieties and our projections and our past, and it all becomes this sort of giant ball of moving stuff. So it's a never-ending process. Never stop trying to clear yourself. But like I said, the more clear you become, the more able you are to tell when it's actually someone else and nothing to do with you. It's all them. And sometimes that's the case. That's what worries me about the mirror exercise. I can see some value for it in the beginning, to identify some of the things that we might be seeing in the world. But you get into some of the nitty gritty kind of stuff, we're talking reality, right? So here is an individual who's being molested by another individual. And they insist that they're only doing this because you're projecting this onto them. And so it's your own fault that this is happening to you. And so you need to change yourself in order to make this not happen. Or change how you see what's going on so that it's not bad, or who knows what else might come out of their mouths. And it's pretty typical in like abusive relationships, um, like where a spouse is being mentally and physically abused by another spouse. Quite commonly, the person who's doing the hitting will say something like, you know what you did, and you knew if you did that, that this is what would happen. So clearly you wanted this, or you wouldn't have done that. And that is an example of mirroring used as an excuse for bad behavior and for them not taking responsibility for their own actions. I'm against that, in case you hadn't figured that out. People need to take personal responsibility for their own stuff. That's kind of the way I roll. So without taking personal responsibility for their own actions, there's nowhere for them to work. You know, they're not going to work through something. They're not going to get more clear, because the universe is, they're making the universe conform around them and manipulating the people that are in it to make them conform to their vision of how things should work, even if it's really super negative. And The teacher that blames the student for the lack of progress, that lays it at the student's feet, that puts them down, tells them they're bad, that they're wrong, that their instincts don't matter, that the teacher knows more than the student, whether it's a teacher student, like I'm saying, or whether it's a spouse and other spouse, or parent and child, it's the same dynamic. So there's someone in your life who is trying to make everything that happens your fault. Go into therapy so that you can get a clearer view of what's going on. Because a good therapist will help you to navigate at least some of the basics of projection and taking on things that don't belong to you and being able to see the picture for what it truly is. I definitely recommend that. It definitely helped me quite a bit in understanding stuff. And then you can use magic to your benefit as far as restructuring your own subconscious, creating the you want to be, not dependent upon someone else's view of who you are, but a view of you that is strengthening, powerful, independent, in tune with the universe, aware of what's going on around them, being in the moment, living to the fullest, accepting the input, both negative and positive, and deciding whether to give it any weight, being thoughtful. Yeah. So when we talked last time about the narrative, that's sort of where that's leading to, like looking at your own narrative to say what it is you expect the universe to do and how you expect the universe to be. And the projecting outward can lead to some pretty terrible places. There are definitely groups of people that are projecting outward and hoping that the world will end horrible disaster. And whenever bad things happen, they point to them and say, see, I said that was going to happen, and there it is, and focus on the negative stuff that's going on in the universe or in our backyard, because the universe itself doesn't really come into it, I guess. But what you put your energy into, your belief into, it's good to think about what does that mean exactly? What is the end result of this way of thinking? Because when it comes down to it, the heart is a better tool for helping you find your path and to follow a way that encourages and embraces life. The head is not. The head is really good at logic scenarios, and you can take almost any logical scenario, and if you keep going through the process to its logical conclusion, it ends up coming back upon itself and destroying itself at the end. It's like it doesn't work. I had a person in a class that I was taking. I was taking a couple of classes, and he was in several of them. He was a very brilliant mathematician, coder, worked with computers really well. Mind was very much all into logic, and he got himself trapped in numerous logic end zones. I don't know what to call them, but he would start off and start to tell me this, and then it would do. I would watch it do exactly what I said. It would go from here to here to here, and then it would come back around and eat itself, and everything would fall apart. And he was very confused about why. He could not understand why it wouldn't work, and I did my best to try and explain to him the reason it didn't work was because it was just in the head and there was no heart. And it's through the heart that things find a balance with each other. Because it is. It's all about balance. Not one thing or another. is one thing and another, and figuring out the correct relationship between those things that works. Yeah, he was so desperate. I was concerned for his mental stability. I have no clue what happened to him after the classes were over, but it was certainly an interesting experience. And I had an interesting experience when I took the computer programming class. The instructor recognized me for what I am. She could tell that this whole thing, just the pure logic of a program and the steps it has to take and so forth, was very foreign to me. And she actually took me aside one day and told me what she knew. And she said, I just have to remark that you're doing an incredible job because I know how difficult this must be for you. And it was very, very difficult. I would get very angry on occasion because it was clear to me what should happen, but apparently the computer did not understand intuition and could not comport to my desires unless I specifically put them out in very specific order. So, yeah. But it was interesting that she could tell I was a different kind of brain or personality or whatever, and acknowledged it. So that was a moment for sure. Um, Figuring out what gives you joy and what works for you. It's not about never having any kind of conflict. It's not what I'm saying. It's not about having no challenges. That's not what I'm saying either, because there's always the potential for conflict, and challenges are normal. There's always something else to learn, to overcome, to embrace, to leave behind, whatever that might be. So it's about the attitude you have while you're doing it. If you're not attached to the outcome so completely that there's only one way this could possibly ever work, the universe probably has a million ways to help you get it to where you want to go. Unless you have one way is the only way it's going to work. So being open to the influences, the possibilities, the weird synchronicities that might appear, following them, dismissing them if you don't like the direction they're going, changing the way you're doing things, not being attached to the outcome, the specific way you want it to happen, and just being in your life and experiencing it, you have the best chance of your own spiritual evolution, in my opinion. So, hope this finds everybody well, and I hope it provides some potential for thought and inner workings and so forth. And I'm happy that I'm not attached to the outcome. It's the process that I'm working with. So, talk to you all later. Been Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra. Blessed be.